Welcome back to the Kenyan Weeks That Was, the show where the receipts come first and the vibes stay in the parking lot. Now, before we begin tonight, I need you to do something for me. I need you to close your eyes just for a moment. I need you to picture a city. Picture the economic capital of East Africa. Picture a city of over 5 million people, home to the headquarters of the United Nations Environmental Program. Yes, the global body whose entire mandate is to protect the planet's environment. Home to international cooperations, diplomatic missions, five-star hotels, and a brand new elevated expressway, and a railway line to the coast that cost $2 billion. Picture that city. Got it? Now, picture the same city drowning. I'm not speaking in metaphor. I'm being quite dramatic. I'm describing something that happens on schedule every single rainy season. When the long rains arrive in April and May, and when short rains arrive in October and November, Nairobi completely transforms. The roads become rivers, the underpasses become reservoirs, the matatus float, the car disappear, the people wade, and every single year, when this happens, the same political pantomime plays out. The officials put on Wellington boots, hold press conferences, visit flood sites for photographs, announce emergency teams, promise that it will never happen again. Quote unquote, supposedly deploy the 4,500 Green Army and then go back to whatever it is they were doing. Until the next floods, at least. Welcome to Nairobi, the only capital city in the world where Google Maps occasionally switches from driving directions to marine navigation. Tonight we're asking one question, a 6-word question that Kenyans have been asking in one form or the other since before most of this studio audience was even born. Here it is. Why does Nairobi flood every single year? Because this is not a mystery. This is not a freak event. It's not an act of God anymore. This happens on predictable schedules. The rains come in April. Nairobi floods. Politicians emerge. Promises are made. The public outreach cycle runs its course, and for roughly about 3 weeks, give or take, a news cycle. And then the system resets. And we wait for the next flood. Tonight, we're going to trace this failure all the way back. We're going to look at the geography, the colonial infrastructure, the destroyed wetlands, the corruption in planning approvals, the budget math that makes solutions structurally impossible, the human beings paying the price, and the extraordinary panel of Kenyan professionals who sat in a room on NTV, named every part of the problem precisely and completely, and from whose solution nothing substantive has yet been done. We're going to ask what other cities have done. We're going to ask what Nairobi looks like in 2050 if nothing changes. And we're going to answer the question that sits underneath all these questions. Why does nothing ever change? So settle in. This is going to be a long one. This one is detailed. This one has receipts. Let me walk you through what a Nairobi flood day actually looks like. Not the press release version, not the county government's emergency deployment update, the actual physical on the ground version, because I think it is important that we start here with what this feels like to the 5 million people who live inside Nairobi. Let me introduce you to Wanjiku. Again, Wanjiku is not a real person. She's every other Kenyan or Nairobian. She's the teacher trying to get to school in Embakasi. She's a nurse trying to reach Kenyatta National Hospital. She's the small business owner trying to get her stall in Gikomba Market. On any given flooded Tuesday morning, 5 million Nairobians try to get somewhere they need to be. So Wanjiku wakes up at 5:30 in the morning. She hears rain on her iron sheets, on the iron sheets of her roof. She checks her phone. The WhatsApp groups are already burning. Ngong Road imefurika kabisa. Mombasa Road iko chini ya maji. Don't bother with outer ring. She needs to get to work by 8. She has 2.5 hours. In a functioning city, That is plenty of time. In Nairobi during the rains, sadly, it's not enough. So she steps outside. The road outside her house, a narrow Maram Road in South B, has become a shallow river. She rolls her trousers and wades through ankle deep brown water to the tarmac. The matatu has not come. The driver refuses to bring the vehicle into the estate because the roads are flooded. So she walks 20 minutes to the main road. She finally boards a matatu, but the traffic on Mombasa Road is at a complete standstill. An underpass is submerged. 3 trucks are stuck across the carriageway. Nobody's moving. So she sits at the vehicle for 2 hours. She arrives at work at 10:15. 2 hours, 15 minutes late. She will be docked that pay. Her employer doesn't want to know or to hear about the floods. The rains are not his problem. That evening, walking home from the bus stop in the dark, she steps into a pothole she cannot see because the road is still under water. So sadly, she twists her ankle. She can't afford a hospital visit. She wraps it in a cloth and sleeps. Multiply Wanjiku's morning by 5 million, and you have a Nairobi on a flood day. That is the actual Nairobi the day that Nairobians go through on a flooded day. The economic cost of a single major flood event is in lost working hours, vehicle damage, destroyed stock, medical emergencies, and disrupted logistics runs into hundreds of millions of shillings. And this happens multiple times every single rainy season, every year on schedule. The Kenya Red Cross and the National Disaster Operations Center have documented dozens of deaths, hundreds of injuries, and thousands of displaced families from Nairobi floods across the past decade. In the 2024 flood season, Kenya as a whole recorded over 200 deaths and tens of thousands of displacements, with Nairobi accounting for a disproportionate share. Houses collapsed, bridges washed away, access to hospitals in Mathare, Korogocho, Mukuru kwa Jenga, community housing over 1 million people combined was cut off entirely. JKIA, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, the economic gateway to East Africa, has experienced multiple flood disruptions in recent years also, including runway flooding and access roads closures that cost airlines, cargo operators, and the Kenya Airports Authority operationally. When the airport that processes East Africa's international trade floods, the message that sends to international investors is not subtle. It says the city cannot manage water. It says plan accordingly. So, to understand why Nairobi floods, you need to understand where Nairobi was built. Because you understand that when you really sit with it, the floods stop being a surprise and start being inevitabilities. One that was created brick by brick, decision by decision, corruption deal by corruption deal, over more than 100 years of existence. Before Nairobi was a city, before it was even a railway depot, it was a swamp. The name Nairobi itself comes from the Maasai phrase Enkare Nairobi, meaning the place of cool waters. The Maasai named it this for a reason. The land that Nairobi now occupies was characterized by extensive wetlands, seasonal rivers, swamps, and marshy plains. It was not a prime building land. It was a natural water management system, the kind that absorbs rainfall, stores it slowly, and releases it gently into rivers, preventing exactly the kind of catastrophic flash flooding that now defines the city's rainy season. So, the 3 primary rivers of Nairobi, the Nairobi River, the Ngong River, and the Mathare River, flow through the city in a network that once drained on intricate systems of wetlands and forests. The Nairobi River originates near Kikuyu and flows eastwards through the city before joining the Athi River. The Ngong River flows north of Nairobi National Park. The Mathare River drains the northern highlands. All three were functional, healthy rivers before the city arrived. All three are now heavily degraded, polluted, encroached upon, and structurally incapable of handling the water volumes that 5 million people generate every time it rains. Nairobi wetlands, once the city's natural flood management infrastructure, have been systematically destroyed over the course of a century. The Ngong wetlands, the Ruai wetlands, the lower Kabete buffer zone, the Karura forest margins, swamps, swamp after swamp, marsh after marsh has been drained, filled, and built upon in their place. Estate roads, warehouses, shopping malls, and, in a particularly pointed irony, government offices. The agencies responsible for environmental protection working from offices built on the drained, marshlands they were supposed to protect. The destruction of wetland is not ancient history. It's ongoing. A 2021 NEMA report identified dozens of active encroachments on wetland areas in Nairobi County alone, including riparian land, the legally protected strips adjacent to rivers where no permanent structures may be built. Kenya law requires a 60-meter buffer zone on either side of a river. In Nairobi, this law is not so much broken. It's simply not applied. Buildings, roads, and entire estate developments have been constructed directly on riparian corridors. Not informally, not in secret, but with full planning approvals issued by county governments. And county government officials who knew exactly what they were approving. When a wetland is replaced by concrete, it no longer absorbs water, it repels it. Every square meter of the new development that covers a previously permeable surface increases the volume and speed of stormwater that the drainage system must handle. The natural sponge is gone. The water has nowhere to go but the road, and then directly into your house. The Water Act and the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, EMCA, both contain explicit provisions protecting riparian land. The 60-meter rule is well established in Kenyan environmental law. It exists because engineers, ecologists, and urban planners have understood for centuries that building on riverbanks destabilizes them, removes their flood-absorbing capacity, and creates catastrophic flood risks downstream. In Nairobi, this law is enforced selectively, which is to say it is enforced against poor informal settlements or settlement residents and routinely overlooked when the developer is politically connected or building a bloody high-rise in a well-affluent area of Nairobi. The banks of the Nairobi River through the informal settlements are periodically cited for illegal structures. The residents are threatened with demolition. Meanwhile, on the same rivers in the wealthier northern suburbs, multi-story buildings and gated estates occupy the same riparian corridors with approved planning documents. The law is not blind. It knows exactly whose structure to overlook. The story of Nairobi's drainage infrastructure is the story of a city that grew by a factor of 200 and whose drainage system grew by almost nothing. Nairobi's fundamental or foundational drainage was built by the British colonial administration between roughly 1899 and 1950. At that time, Nairobi was a small railway administrative town, a few thousand European settlers, a few tens of thousands of African and South Asian residents, and vast open tracts of undeveloped land that managed their own water naturally. The drainage system built during this period was designed for that city, a compact, low-density colonial outpost designed for a population of perhaps 100,000 at maximum projected capacity. Nairobi's drainage system was designed when the city had more cows than cars. It has not been meaningfully upgraded since. The cows are gone though, and there now there are now several million cars. The drainage does not know this. By Kenya's independence in 1963, Nairobi's population had reached approximately 350,000 people. Today, It's over 4 million within county boundaries and over 5 million in the greater metropolitan area. The population has grown by a factor of 15 since independence. The drainage infrastructure has not grown by a factor of 15. In many parts of the city, particularly in the older, denser, low-income areas, it has not grown at all. The same culverts, the same open channels, the same undersized pipes that were installed in the colonial era are still handling and failing to handle the stormwater of a mega city. The single most important variable in urban flooding is not how much rain falls. It is what the rain falls on. I need to repeat that part. The single most important variable in urban flooding is not how much rain falls. It is what the rain falls on. Engineers all over measure this using a metric called the runoff coefficient, the proportion of rainfall that flows off a surface rather than being absorbed. A healthy forest absorbs about 80 to 90% of the rainfall. A wetland does similar work. A paved surface, tarmac, concrete, tile, repels 70 to 95% of rain. Almost all of it flows off. It goes somewhere. And in a poorly drained city, it goes into roads, homes, and rivers. As Nairobi has urbanized, its impervious surface area has expanded dramatically. The city that was once a swamp and a savanna is now overwhelmingly covered in concrete and tarmac. Parking lots, paved compounds, rooftops, roads, pavements, all courtyard floors. Every square meter of new development that replaces a permeable natural surface increases the volume and the velocity of stormwater runoff that the drainage system must contain. The drainage system, meanwhile, remains sized for a city a fraction of today's size. And here's where it gets worse. Even the drainage infrastructure that does exist in Nairobi is routinely rendered non-functional by blockage. Nairobi's waterways and drainage channels collect enormous quantities of solid waste, plastic bags, polythene packaging, food waste, construction debris, sand that accumulates until culverts and channels are partly or completely blocked. So, when the rain comes and the drainage cannot carry it and the water goes overground, roads flood, properties flood. People actually die. This is not a technical problem without a solution. It's arguably most solvable part of Nairobi's flood crisis. Because regular preventive maintenance of drains, clearing culverts, dredging channels, removing accumulated debris does not require billion-shilling infrastructure projects. It requires showing up consistently before the rains. And in Nairobi, drain maintenance happens reactively in the 2 weeks after a major flood as a public relations exercise and not before. The drains are cleared, photographs are taken, the press release is issued. The drains then are left to fill up once again. The cycle resets. Every flood season, Nairobi County rediscovers the revolutionary concept of cleaning drains. This discovery is always announced in a press release. The release always textures or features a photograph of an official in Wellington boot standing next to a drain. The drain is momentarily clean. The Wellington boots are returned to storage. The drain fills. We wait until the next rainy season. We have established that Nairobi is built on a floodplain, that its drainage was designed for a city that no longer exists, and that its natural buffers have been systematically destroyed. None of this happened by accident. None of it was inevitable. All of it required decisions, and all of those decisions were made by people, often people with very specific financial interests in those decisions. Under Kenya's devolution framework, county planning departments issue building approvals, change of use permits, and zoning authorizations. The national government sets the broader regulatory framework. On paper, this is a functioning system with environmental safeguards, flood risk assessments, and riparian buffer requirements built into it. But in practice, Nairobi's urban plumbing approval system functions as a market. The commodity being traded is the approval itself. The currency is cash and sometimes political connection. Building in a flood zone, there is an approval for that at a price, of course. Construction on a riparian land, the planning officer can be persuaded that the 60-meter rule has flexibility. Developing in a wetland or on a wetland, developing a wetland, with the right intermediaries, the NEMA environmental impact assessment can be navigated creatively. The result is that Nairobi has approved and permitted development in areas that any competent engineer would flag immediately as flood prone, not informally, not illegally, in the technical sense, with approved planning documents issued by government offices, stamped and signed. The connection between major real estate development and political protection in Kenya is not a theory anymore. It is documented. It's a documented pattern. High-profile cases over the past decade have involved senior political figures, sitting and former elected officials, cabinet ministers and cabinet secretaries, county government officers with direct financial interest in the real estate developments that received planning approvals in flood risk areas. And don't even get me started on all these other buildings that are crumbling and falling off the sky because the improper engineering aspects were followed, because they got approvals for some shoddy ass work that was being carried out. Think about the latest one that happened in South Sea. And as of the last few days, I watched a video that indicated that, guess what? Construction is back on. Like nothing ever happened. Like lives were not lost. That's why we're saying in some cases, the same officials who signed the approvals were later found to have co-investments or financial relationships with the developers and the developments they actually approved. You try convince me and the rest of us in Kenya, like 5-year-olds, that the person who approved that building in South Sea, are you trying to tell me they're not in bed with one of the government officials? That they're not working together in tandem? Because how is it that the building freaking collapsed and crumbled, and few weeks later, before even these people that lost their lives, their bodies have decayed, construction is back on? This creates an obvious structural problem for flood governance. The people who benefit from approving development on flood-prone land are the same people who are supposed to prevent that development. They are simultaneously the regulator and the regulated. The conflict of interest is not hidden anymore. It is simply not treated as a disqualifying problem, because treating it as a problem would be, for lack of a better word, expensive. The Nairobi real estate industry has a technical term for properties built in flood zones. They call them waterfront properties. Premium pricing, guaranteed views, annual flooding not mentioned in the brochures. Periodically, usually in the aftermath of a particularly severe flood, the government announces crackdowns on illegal structures in the flood zones. NEMA issues notices. The county government announces demolition timelines. Senior officials hold press conferences about the importance of protecting riparian corridors. Headlines are written, and then, like clockwork, nothing happens. The structures are not demolished. The orders are stayed by court injunctions. The political will evaporates within weeks, and then the next flood comes, and the same officials announce the same crackdowns, and the same nothing continues to happen, which brings us to the most uncomfortable question in the whole of this episode, a question that nobody in the government wants you to ask out loud. And here it is: who freaking benefits from flooding? Because flooding as a political event does not have zero beneficiaries. Emergency procurement, the purchase of rescue boats. Oh God. And don't even get me started on that idea of rescue boats, because I recently had, as you did perhaps, on a Citizen interview, when quote unquote abled governor of Nairobi claimed that, so casually. For me, it was his demeanor. It was how he spoke about it as though there was no consequence to it. And he was asked about these supposed rescue boats. And he said, yeah. We have a couple. We have like 5 of them. And they're somewhere. And he was asked, 5? And he's like, yeah, which one? It is proper speedboats, proper emergency recovery boats. And he's like, some of them were the boats that we had at Uhuru Park. Uhuru Park. Are we talking about the couple boats that we were supposed to go out there and, swing and feel merry as we try and do that? Or where are we talking about this nonsense? Show us the boats that you actually procure. Because last year only when we had the floods, you said, we put in billions of shillings to buy proper boats. Where were they? Where were they last week? How comes we didn't see even one attempt a rescue anywhere? And if you have any proof or any footage that shows the contrary, we as the Kenyan week that was are willing to stand in and produce. If you produce it, we will broadcast it and we will take our L and we will apologize publicly the same way we are castigating you for your nonchalance and lack of professionalism. Away with the rant. The emergency procurement, the patches of those rescue boats, again, the sandbags, the temporary shelters, emergency roads repairs is untendered. Emergency basis spending. In Kenya's procurement history, emergency procurement has been a reliable mechanism for looting public resources. Disaster responses create spending without competitive tendering. Every flood is a procurement opportunity for those positioned to take advantage of the bloody flood. Beyond that, the continued failure to invest in permanent drainage infrastructure means that the same flood mitigation budget line items are relocated or reallocated every year without ever producing permanent results. Talk about the contractors who repair the same flooded roads year after year with no obligation to achieve a permanent fix, have a direct financial interest in continued flooding. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is basic incentive analysis. And here's where we put on our forensic accountant hats, because this is the part of the story that makes everything else make sense. Under Kenya's devolution framework, Nairobi County government is primarily responsible for urban planning, drainage maintenance, and stormwater management within the city at least. The county receives a substantial annual allocation from the National Equitable Share Fund. The Nairobi County's allocation has ranged between 12 billion and 18 billion shillings per year in recent years, plus its own locally generated revenue, which is among the highest of any county in Kenya. Within these budgets, specific allocations are made to infrastructure, roads, and drainage. And then someone in the room at the NTV panel, with a quiet precision of a person who has simply stopped pretending, laid out the arithmetic that explains everything. The county government is receiving 1.7 billion monthly. 1.2 billion goes to salaries. 200 million is the only thing remaining for infrastructure. Of course, we're in this crisis. Do you need me to say anything after that? The panelist himself asked the room exactly that question, and the honest answer is no. That single number explains everything. Nairobi County receives 1.7 billion shillings every month. 70% of it goes to paying county employees. The city of 5 million people sitting on floodplains with colonial era drainage with 3 degraded rivers gets 200 million shillings per month to maintain all of its physical infrastructure. That is less than what a mid-sized developer spends building a single apartment block on one of those said rivers. And don't even get me started on whatever we saw in the recent past that the Auditor General spoke about, how the Nairobi County government has spent our money on multiple trips abroad, while our drains are still clogged, while our lands continue to be occupied and developed, even though they are riparian lands. Why are they bloody traveling to find to try and, benchmark and they can actually start by clearing the drains. Because you see, over the years, Nairobi has also received targeted funding for drainage improvement programs and river restoration projects from international development partners. So the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the French Development Agency, bilateral donors at significant cost. The Nairobi River Regeneration Project, backed by multiple international partners, including the United Nations Environment Program, had plans for riparian land clearances, river channel dredging, stormwater drainage upgrades, and green infrastructure along riverbanks. The project made genuine progress under the administration that established it. Sections of the Nairobi River were dredged. Some riparian encroachments were removed, and then political winds shifted. A new county administration took over. The project stalled. The cleared sections of the riverbanks were re-encroached within months. The dredged channels silted up again without any maintenance. The flood risk sadly returned like it had never left. In Nairobi, river restoration projects are like New Year's resolutions. Enthusiastically announced in January, mildly attempted in February, quietly forgotten by March. And when the rains come in April, the river does not care about your resolutions. Nairobi's urban planning history contains a graveyard of announced, approved, funded, and incomplete drainage infrastructure projects, drainage improvement tenders that were awarded but not completed, box culverts expansion that were designed but never built, stormwater management plans that were commissioned at significant cost, and then they were filed. The physical infrastructure of flood mitigation remains inadequate, not because money was never allocated to improve it. Money has always been allocated repeatedly, but because allocated money did not reliably translate into completed infrastructure. The mechanisms of this failure are familiar to anyone who has studied Kenyan public procurement: inflated tender prices, substandard work, supervision failures, political interference in contractor selection, ghost contractors, and underlying all of it, the fundamental misalignment of incentives. The political figures who authorize spending are not accountable for whether the infrastructure actually works. They will not be held responsible when the same roads flood again next year. There is no consequence for failure. And without consequence, there is no, say it with me, there is no reform. I want to take you now to a specific room. On a specific evening in 2026, an NTV talk show brought together Kenya's best urban governance minds: town planners, architects, landscape architects, surveyors, engineers, commissioners, a brigadier from the Nairobi River Commission, community chairmen from Dandora and Embakasi, Gen Z residents, a lawyer, a Red Cross representative, and a moderator who was, by the end of tours, clearly reconsidering some life choices. The question on the table: can Nairobi's planning situation be salvaged? What happened next was one of the most instructive things I've ever watched on Kenyan television. Not because they found the answers, but because the gap between what they knew and what has been done about what they know is the clearest possible illustration of how governance failure actually works in this freaking country. Everyone in that room was competent. Everyone in that room was serious. Everyone in that room knew exactly what the problem was. And 2 hours later, as the show wrapped up and the credits rolled, Nairobi was still flooded. Let me take you through it. The budget arithmetic that ends the conversation before it even begins. The panel opened, as all serious Kenyan governance consultations or conversations eventually must, with a number, specifically with the arithmetic of Nairobi County's monthly budget, delivered by a panelist with the quiet exhaustion of someone who has explained this too many times to too many rooms that didn't change anything. This is what one of the panel participants had to say. The county government is receiving 1.7 billion monthly. 1.2 billion goes to salaries. 200 million is the only thing remaining for infrastructure. Of course, we are in a crisis. He then looked at the room and asked quietly, quite sincerely, Do you need me to say anything after that? And the answer, when you really sit with that number, eh, the answer is no. You don't. 200 million shillings per month for the physical infrastructure of a city of 5 million people. That figure is not the result of poverty. Nairobi generates approximately 25% of Kenya's GDP. That figure is a result of structural misalignment between where the revenue goes and what the city needs done. It's a political choice embedded in the county wage bill, protected by unions that represent county workers, and resistant to reform precisely because the people who could reform it are also the people who benefit from the current arrangement. Into this room came Patrick Andolo, a town planner, urban specialist, a former director of city planning in Nairobi, a man who has spent decades inside the system trying to make it produce something. And Patrick Andolo said something that, if you let it land, rearranges your entire understanding of who is responsible for what. This is what he said. I don't think we have a planning issue in Nairobi. I think we have a governance issue. The planners in government have not been given a brief to plan. It doesn't begin with the planners. It begins with leaders. Let that marinate. Let it just, sit down with you, because the man who was a director of city planning in Nairobi is telling you that planning is not the problem, because planners cannot plan for themselves. They need a client, a political principal who says, here is the brief, here is the mandate, here is the authority, here is the budget, now plan. Without that, the planner sits in an office, draws things on paper, and waits. When you are campaigning for the position of mayor of Nairobi, or governor of Nairobi, you know very well what your assignment is going to be. It is mandatory. So, are you ready to hire me to do a plan? I'll be happy to do the plan. And then came the detail that makes this concrete in the most devastating way possible. And Dolo revealed that he started working on Nairobi's so-called new plan. The basic governance document that tells people what gets built, where, and why in the year 2001. It took 14 years to produce, 14 years for a document that, as Andolo himself noted, should take 6 to 8 months at most. And after those 14 years of effort, the plan was not even picked up. It was never implemented. It was produced, and then it was filed. And Nairobi went on flooding. Nairobi city's master plan took 14 years to produce and was then never used. This raises the question of what it was produced for. The answer upon reflection is for the filing cabinet. Kenya has developed an entire genre of governance documents whose primary purpose is to exist. So that when someone asks, do you have a plan? The answer can technically be, yeah, it's filed, rather than examining what happened to the plan after filing. One of the panel's most important moments came when Commissioner Musumba of the Nairobi Rivers Commission quietly expanded the historical timeline that the discussion had been using. James, you'd have gone further back than 1997. Floods of 1943, 1948, 1961, 1981, 1988. Before you get to the 90s, flooding in Nairobi has been there since Nairobi existed. I'm a bit surprised to hear our senior planners talk about this like it is something new. Mungu then made a point that deserves to be fully understood. The 1948 Nairobi City Master Plan, the document that remains extraordinarily the only official zoning plan Nairobi has ever legally had, clearly delineated floodplains and riparian zones. It marked precisely which areas should never be built upon because they are flood prone. Those zones are today exactly where informal settlements are. Those zones are where the illegal land allocations happened, where allotment letters were issued by government officials, where people were told by government agents that their land was legal, that their tenure was secure, that their homes were theirs, in areas that the 1948 plan explicitly flagged as flood zones. If our planners worked with hydrologists in planning, some of these decisions should never have been made. The hydrologists would have said, this is a floodplain. Don't approve that development. What did they do? They approved it without consideration for that. This is the critical admission. Not that the information was unavailable, not that the science was uncertain or contested. The scientific and technical information existed, was available to decision makers, and was overridden, approved anyway, stamped, filed. The floodplains were known. The structure was built on it. The allotment letter was issued. The residents paid. The approving officer was paid. And then the rains fell. Surveyor Emily Jero of the Institute of Surveyors of Kenya was one of the panel's most direct voices on the political economy of the problem, the dimension that officials in the room were carefully dancing around. I can assure this audience, we cannot solve this problem of flooding in Nairobi within the context of election cycles. If Sakaja, the supposed governor, was talking about what Nairobi looked like 10 years from now, would be talking about investing 5 or 6 billion every year to a consistent plan. The colonizers left us small drains that have to hold the population, that cannot hold the population we have now. We should be building another city of stormwater infrastructure for Nairobi. Emily also cited a precedent that the Kenyan Week That Was team wants to hold up for a closer examination. In 1860, a Victorian engineer named Joseph Bazalgette designed London's combined sewer and drainage system. At the time, London had approximately 3 million residents. Bazalgette built the system to a capacity of or that could handle about 6 million, double what the city then needed. He did this deliberately because he understood that cities grow and that the cost of rebuilding inadequate infrastructure later is always greater than the cost of building adequate infrastructure now. Today, London has over 9 million people. The city is still using Bazalgette's system. The man had the foresight and 160 years ago to build a future for a future he had never and he could never ever see. Nairobi's colonial inheritors built for a small administrative outpost and have not substantively upgraded the drainage since. The differential is not engineering knowledge. The knowledge was identical. It was not resources. Victorian Britain was not wealthier relative to its infrastructure needs than modern Kenya. The difference is political will and ambition. The ambition to build a city that works, not for the election cycle, but for a century. One of the most technically illuminating contributions on the NTV panel came from Arthur Adair of the Architects Alliance, who walked into the room and immediately flipped widely held assumptions on its head. This is counterintuitive, and it is correct. A low-density estate, large individual compounds, heavily paved, minimal green cover, each household shedding water onto the road at full run-off speed, generates more stormwater per person than a well-designed high-density apartment building with proper drainage management. The problem is not that Nairobi is too dense. The problem is that density is being done badly without requiring developers to account for the water they generate. Adair's proposed regulatory fix was elegant. Any new development should be required to demonstrate that its rate of post-development stormwater runoff does not exceed its rate of pre-development runoff. In plain language, if your building generates more surface water than the land did before you built, you must solve that problem on your property before it becomes the city's problem. Singapore implemented this exact policy. According to Adair, it is a significant factor in how Singapore reduced its flood-prone areas from 3,200 hectares to 24. Imagine. Ade also introduced the panel to the concept of rain gardens, engineered permeable landscapes that capture, hold, and slowly release storm water, planted over a substrate of boulders or drainage material that acts as underground reservoirs. Not hypothetical. He had built them. A rain garden he designed in Runda in 2012 on a property that had been chronically flood prone, still does not flood today. He built one in Kibera, one in a school compound in Kuru, using repurposed Coca-Cola crates as the drainage substrate. These are not grand infrastructure projects requiring 10 years of tendering and billion shillings in budget. They are scalable, affordable inventions that can be deployed incrementally across a city. Only if the regulatory framework requires them. In Nairobi, the regulatory framework does not require them. It does not even mention them. Brigadier Jassim Rashi, CEO of the Nairobi Rivers Commissions, brought the most operationally specific evidence of the entire panel. The commission was established with legislative mandate, cross-agency coordination authority, and a specific timeline for deliverables. And its watch, under its watch, something concrete literally has been produced. In September 2023, 49 institutions from this country sat down and ratified a document, the Nairobi River Recovery Strategy, a document produced by a multi-agency team. That document is a solution to the problem we are talking about, and that is what is being implemented today. The Brigadier described the engineering program that the Commission is executing, widening and deepening river channels, installing weir dams at 5 to 6 kilometer intervals to create distributed flood retention, and completing the 1.8 by 1.8 meter trunk sewer lines in Nairobi River Corridor, the infrastructure that separates sewage from stormwater, which would have been built decades ago, though. He stated that this trunk sewer for Nairobi River alone could be completed by January of the following year. The Brigadier's refrain across the panel was consistent. The plan is there. The engineering is understood. The institutional coordination exists. The document has been ratified by 49 institutions. What is missing is physical space. The riparian corridors that would have been occupied, developed, built upon, in many of these cases legally protected by court injunctions obtained by the very developers who built illegally in the first place. The Commission cannot build retention dams without land, cannot build the sewer without corridors, cannot clear the corridor without asking people to move, which requires political decisions that require that the Commission as a coordinating organization rather than an executing body cannot make unilaterally.